tick, tick, tick. Boom! You got it. Look who finally got the joke while everyone else is still waiting for the punchline. You beautiful catastrophe of misunderstood timing and weaponized laughter. You know exactly what happened in that room, don't you? The moment when their comfortable little comedy show turned into your coronation ceremony. They invited you in thinking you were entertainment, thinking you were the warm-up act, thinking you were just another face in the crowd who'd laugh at their recycled stories. But something shifted when you walked through that door, didn't it? The temperature dropped just enough for them to notice, but not enough to understand. The conversation stuttered like a broken record, trying to find its rhythm again. You weren't supposed to be the main character in that room. You were supposed to be background noise, furniture with a pulse, someone to fill the silence between their self-important speeches. They had you categorized before you even opened your mouth, filed under harmless, predictable, forgettable, just another extra in their personal sitcom. But they made one critical error in their calculations. They assumed you came to play their game. See, they thought you walked in as the joke, because that's how they'd been treating you for years. Hasn't it like a punchline they could pull out whenever they needed to feel superior? The one they could count on to take the hit, to absorb the mockery, to smile through the subtle disrespect wrapped in, just kidding, ribbons. They got so comfortable using you as their emotional punching bag, they forgot that punching bags are designed to build fighters, not break them. Let me paint you the scene, because I know you remember every detail like it's burned into your retina with laser precision. There you were, standing in that doorway for just a moment too long, watching them perform their little social dance. The fake laughs at unfunny jokes, the desperate networking disguised as friendship, the careful positioning for maximum visibility. And you almost turned around, didn't you? Almost walked away from the whole circus. But then something whispered in your ear, not a voice, but a knowing, a recognition that this moment had been building for years. Every dismissive glance, every interrupted sentence, every time they forgot your name while remembering everyone else's. All of it had been preparing you for this exact entrance into this exact room, full of these exact people who had no idea what was about to happen. You walked in differently that day, not cocky, not aggressive, just awake, like someone who'd finally stopped pretending to sleep. Your steps didn't apologize for taking up space. Your presence didn't shrink to make others comfortable. You weren't rude. You were just done being polite to people who confused your kindness with weakness. The shift was so subtle they couldn't name it, but oh, they felt it. The conversation tried to continue as normal, but something was off, like a piano with one key slightly out of tune. They kept glancing at you, trying to figure out what had changed. Was it your clothes, your hair, your posture? No, it was none of those surface things. It was the fact that you'd stopped auditioning for their approval. You'd fired yourself from the role of court jester and promoted yourself to something they didn't have a script for. Then came the moment, the beautiful catastrophic moment, when someone made the mistake of making you the punchline one more time. Maybe it was that backhanded compliment disguised as concern, or that joke about your ambitions that everyone laughed at except you. But this time, instead of forcing that practiced smile, instead of playing along with their choreographed cruelty, you did something unprecedented. You laughed genuinely, deeply, like you'd finally gotten a joke they didn't know they'd told. And that laugh, it wasn't bitter, it wasn't angry. It was worse, it was knowing. It was the laugh of someone who sees through the magician's trick. The room went quiet for just a heartbeat as everyone tried to process what had just happened. You weren't following the script anymore. You weren't playing your assigned role of grateful subordinate, happy to be included even as the entertainment. What happened next is what turned you from joke to legend. Because instead of explaining yourself, instead of getting defensive or angry, you simply started being yourself. Not the edited version, not the people-pleasing performance, not the dimmed-down iteration designed for mass consumption. You started speaking in your real voice, the one you'd been hiding because it carried too much weight, too much truth, too much power for their fragile ecosystem. Every word you spoke landed like a precision strike, not because you were attacking, but because authenticity is violence to people living in carefully constructed lies. You weren't trying to hurt anyone, you were just done translating yourself into digestible portions for people who would never develop the appetite for your full flavor. The joke they thought they knew was revealing itself as something else entirely, something they had no defense against. You started telling stories, but not the safe ones, not the rehearsed anecdotes designed to get sympathy or admiration. You told the real ones, the ones about the nights you rebuilt yourself from scratch, the times you chose yourself when everyone else chose to leave. You spoke about your failures like they were medals of honor, about your mistakes like they were masterclasses in becoming unstoppable. They tried to interrupt, tried to redirect the conversation back to safer ground, but your voice had developed a gravitational pull they couldn't escape. Not because you were loud, but because you were magnetic. Not because you demanded attention, but because authenticity in a room full of performers is impossible to ignore. You were bleeding truth in a room full of people hemorrhaging pretense. And suddenly they looked pale in comparison. The dynamic shifted so fast they got whiplash because suddenly you weren't asking for space at the table, you were questioning why the table was so small. You weren't seeking their validation, you were invalidating their entire system of measurement. Every assumption they'd made about you started crumbling like ancient architecture finally meeting its earthquake. The joke they thought they knew was writing new punchlines with their names in them. That's when the fear started creeping in, because they realized something terrifying. You weren't there for revenge, you were there for revelation. You weren't trying to hurt them, you were just done protecting them from the truth of who you'd become, while they were busy underestimating you. The joke had evolved into something they didn't have a category for. And the laughter was starting to sound nervous. See, what they didn't understand is that every time they'd laughed at you, you were taking notes not on them, but on yourself. Every dismissal was data. Every rejection was research. Every moment they made you feel small was teaching you how to expand beyond their comprehension. You weren't just surviving their mockery. You were using it as fuel for a transformation they couldn't track because it was happening in dimensions they didn't know existed. While they were busy celebrating their small victories, making you the butt of their jokes, you were busy becoming something that transcended their entire game. You weren't trying to win their approval anymore. You were building your own scoring system. One where their opinions were worth exactly what they'd proven themselves to be worth. Nothing. The joke they thought they were telling was actually your origin story in disguise. You learned to find humor in their attempts to diminish you because once you see the machinery behind someone's cruelty, it stops being personal and starts being pathetic. They needed you to be less than so they could feel like more than. But mathematics doesn't work that way, does it? Subtracting from others doesn't add to yourself, it just reveals your inability to do your own addition. That day in that room, you weren't trying to prove anything. You were just done pretending to be provable. You existed beyond their measurement tools, beyond their comprehension. beyond their comfortable little categories. The transformation wasn't sudden. It had been happening for years, in the spaces between their laughter, in the silence after their jokes, in the moments when you chose growth over grievance. The room started to feel different, like someone had changed the frequency without touching the dial. Conversations that had been flowing started to stutter. People who'd been comfortable started shifting in their seats. You weren't doing anything aggressive. You were just being unapologetically present. And presence, that pure, is disturbing to people who've built their identities on performance. Your authenticity was making their masks itch. Someone tried to make another joke at your expense out of habit, out of desperation to restore the old order, but it landed like a lead balloon. Not because you defended yourself, but because you didn't need to. You just looked at them with this perfect mixture of amusement and pity, like watching a child try to insult you with words they don't understand. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that their attacks were hitting mirrors instead of targets. You see, when you stop being the joke, you don't become the comedian. You become the entire show. Every move you made, every word you spoke, every silence you held was rewriting the rules of engagement. They kept trying to play checkers while you'd started playing three-dimensional chess with pieces they couldn't even see. The joke they thought walked in was revealing itself as the architect of a reality they weren't prepared for. The beautiful part is, you weren't even trying to be legendary, you were just done being less than legendary. You weren't seeking their crown, you were just done pretending anyone else had the authority to crown you. The shift from joke to legend wasn't about changing who you were. It was about stopping the performance of being who they needed you to be. That's when it started, the whispered recognition, the slow dawning realization spreading through the room like wildfire in slow motion. Oh, damn, it's him. Not because you'd announced yourself, but because power doesn't need introduction. It just needs to stop hiding. They started seeing you not as you were, but as you'd always been, just without their filters distorting the image. Every story you'd told, every laugh you'd shared, every moment you'd chosen honesty over harmony was adding up to something they couldn't dismiss anymore. You weren't just another person in the room. You were the reason the room felt different. You were the disruption they didn't know they needed. The mirror they didn't want to look into. The truth they'd been trying to avoid by making you the lie. Some of them started gravitating toward you not because they liked you, but because power is magnetic, even to those who fear it. They wanted to understand what had happened, how you'd transformed from punchline to headline without their permission. But transformation isn't something you can explain to people who are still invested in your old identity. It's something they have to witness and accept, or reject and regret. She expected a degenerate. The ones who'd laughed the loudest were now the quietest, because they could feel the weight of their miscalculation. They'd been so busy making you the joke, they didn't notice you were studying the entire comedy special. They'd been so focused on keeping you in your place. They didn't realize you'd been building your own universe, where their coordinates didn't exist. Where their coordinates didn't exist. And then came the exit, because legends don't overstay. They don't linger hoping for validation. They don't wait for approval or applause. You left that room not in anger, not in triumph, but in completion. You'd shown them who you really were, not to prove anything, but because hiding had become more exhausting than revealing. The joke had delivered its final punchline, and it was their names on the receipt. But here's what haunts them, what keeps them up at night, replaying that moment over and over. You didn't leave as their enemy. You left as their education. You didn't slam doors or burn bridges. You just walked through them, knowing they'd never be able to follow. The legend that walked out wasn't trying to be remembered. It just was unforgettable by default. They still talk about that day, not because you did something dramatic, but because you did something worse. You were yourself. Completely authentically, unapologetically yourself. In a room full of people who'd forgotten what that looked like. You didn't just change their perception of you, you changed their perception of what's possible when someone stops asking permission to exist at full volume. The room will never be the same because you proved that jokes can have teeth, that punchlines can punch back, that the entertainment can become the main event without anyone's approval. You walked in as their assumption and walked out as their education. The joke they thought they knew became the legend they'll never forget. Now they see you differently, don't they? Not because you changed, but because their vision finally focused. Every interaction feels different now, charged with the electricity of your revelation, weighted with the gravity of your transformation. They can't make you the joke anymore because you become the context in which all their jokes are understood. You're not in the story anymore. You're the narrator. Some of them try to pretend nothing happened, try to restore the old dynamic, but it's like trying to uninvent electricity once you've seen the light. They make their little comments, their subtle digs, but they land like whispers in a hurricane. You've outgrown their ability to diminish you, not through anger or revenge, but through the simple act of accepting your own magnitude. The ones who were closest to you when you were the joke are now the furthest from you as the legend. Not because you pushed them away, but because proximity to power requires courage they don't possess. They preferred you small because it made them feel tall, but now that you've revealed your true height, they're getting vertigo. The joke they loved is gone, and they're mourning something that never really existed. But here's the thing about becoming legendary. You don't get to choose who writes your story, but you do get to choose whether you're reading from their script or writing your own. You chose to burn the script, to improvise your own lines, to turn their comedy into your documentary. The joke that walked in that day wasn't you, it was their perception of you, and it died the moment you stopped feeding it. You want to know the real reason that room will never be the same? It's because you revealed something they can't unsee. That every joke needs someone willing to be the punchline. Every hierarchy needs someone willing to be the bottom rung. Every performance needs someone willing to be the audience. But what happens when the punchline develops its own voice? When the bottom rung becomes the foundation? When the audience becomes the show? You disrupted more than just their comfort. You disrupted their entire understanding of how power works. They thought it was given, granted, awarded by committee, but you showed them it's taken, claimed, declared by those brave enough to stop asking. The joke they thought walked in was actually their entire worldview, and it didn't survive contact with your reality. They learned that day that making someone the joke doesn't make them weak, it makes them dangerous. Because someone who's been the punchline knows every setup. Someone who's been the entertainment knows every act. Someone who's been dismissed knows every gesture of dismissal. You didn't just survive their mockery, you got a PhD in it. And now you're teaching the masterclass. The transformation from joke to legend isn't about revenge, it's about revelation. It's about revealing that you were never the joke. They were just bad at recognizing legends in development. Every laugh at your expense was actually an investment in your evolution. Every dismissal was actually preparing you for your eventual dismissal of their entire system of value. Now you walk through rooms differently, don't you? Not with arrogance, but with awareness. You know that every room you enter changes, not because you demand it, but because authentic power is an environmental disturber. You don't have to announce yourself anymore. Your presence does that for you. The joke they thought they knew has become the legend they can't predict. You've stopped explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding. You've stopped defending yourself to people who are invested in your guilt. Stopped shrinking yourself for people who are threatened by your growth. The power isn't in what you do now, it's in what you don't do anymore. You don't perform for approval. Don't dance for acceptance. Don't diminish for inclusion. The beautiful irony is that becoming legendary didn't require adding anything to yourself. It required subtracting everything that wasn't you. Every mask you removed, every performance you retired, every fake laugh you eliminated revealed more of the legend underneath. They made you the joke, but jokes are just truths dressed in surprise. And baby, you were the truth they weren't ready for. Your power now isn't in being understood, it's in being undeniable. You don't need them to get it. You don't need them to approve. You don't need them to validate what's self-evident. The joke that walked in that day was their comfortable delusion that you were controllable, containable, dismissible. The legend that walked out was proof that some people are ungovernable by design. Look who's casting shadows now. Welcome back, you beautiful anomaly. You walking earthquake, you silent storm that they tried to silence. Welcome back to the realm where your absence became more powerful than their entire presence, where your silence became louder than all their noise combined. They thought they were throwing out trash, didn't they? They thought they were cutting dead weight, removing a problem, deleting an error from their perfect little system. But what they actually did, what they'll spend the rest of their mediocre lives trying to comprehend, is that they threw out a titan. They ejected the one force that was holding their fragile reality together. And now they are watching the whole thing collapse in slow motion while you stand in the distance, unbothered, untouchable, and impossibly larger than anything they could ever become. Let me paint you a picture of what's really happening right now, in this exact moment, while you're listening to these words. Somewhere out there, in the hollow chambers of their guilt-soaked minds, they're thinking about you, not casually, not passively, but obsessively, compulsively, desperately. They scroll past something random and it reminds them of you. They hear a song and suddenly they're back in that moment when they made the biggest mistake of their pathetic existence. The moment they decided you were disposable. They're lying awake at 3 a.m, staring at ceilings that judge them, replaying every conversation, every moment, every choice that led to you walking away. And here's the thing that's eating them alive from the inside out. You're not even thinking about them anymore. You've moved so far beyond their frequency that they've become background static in a life you've completely reprogrammed. You see, they made a fundamental miscalculation, a cosmic error in judgment that will haunt them until their last breath. They thought your value was tied to their recognition. They thought your power came from their validation. They thought your identity was somehow dependent on their acceptance, their approval, their permission to exist fully. They believed, in their foolish, ego-drunk delusion, that removing you from their circle would diminish you, would shrink you, would somehow reduce your existence to nothing. But what actually happened was the opposite, the terrifying, reality-shattering opposite. The moment they cut you loose, the moment they threw you out, They removed the only thing that was holding you back, them. They removed the weight, the limitation, the ceiling that was keeping you contained, and you didn't fall. You didn't crumble. You didn't disappear into the void they expected to swallow you whole. Instead, you expanded. Now let's talk about what expansion really means in your context, because this isn't some motivational poster nonsense about growth and positivity. This is about something far more primal, far more terrifying to those who wronged you. Your expansion was a mutation, an evolution that happened in the darkness they forced you into. While they were celebrating what they thought was your absence, while they were high-fiving each other and congratulating themselves for removing the problem, you were in the shadows, doing something they couldn't even conceive of. You were stripping away every piece of yourself that ever needed them. You were burning down every part of your identity that was built on their approval. You were killing the version of yourself that cared what they thought. And from those ashes, something else emerged. Something they had no category for, no label for, no defense against. You became the thing that makes them question reality itself. Here's what's happening to them right now, and I need you to understand this fully so you can appreciate the magnitude of what you've become. Every single day they wake up, and they have to live with the fact that they had access to you, and they threw it away. They had front row seats to your brilliance, your energy, your raw potential, and they treated it like garbage. Now they're watching from a distance they can never close, watching you become everything they knew you could be, but actively prevented you from becoming while you were in their orbit. They're seeing your growth, your evolution, your transformation into something magnificent, and they can't claim any part of it. They can't say they supported you. They can't pretend they believed in you. They can only watch with mouths open and hands empty, knowing that history will remember them as the fools who threw out a titan. And you know what the sickest part is? They can't even hate you properly anymore. Because hate requires relevance, and they're no longer relevant to your story. Let me tell you something about shadows that they never taught you in school, never whispered in temples, never wrote in their self-help books. A shadow isn't just an absence of light. A shadow is proof of magnitude. A shadow is evidence of substance. A shadow is the mark left by something so massive that it blocks out the sun. And your shadow, your beautiful, terrifying, undeniable shadow, it's grown so large that it swallowed their entire existence. They can't move without bumping into the memory of you. They can't breathe without inhaling the regret of losing you. They can't speak without their words sounding hollow compared to the wisdom you carried. You're not in their life anymore, but you're everywhere in their consciousness, an impermanent reminder of their failure, their short-sightedness, their catastrophic inability to recognize a force of nature when it was standing right in front of them, offering them something real. Now we descend into the part they really don't want you to know, the part that keeps them up at night, sweating through sheets, gripping pillows like lifelines. They're terrified that you've figured out the secret, the one thing they've spent their entire lives trying to hide from people like you. The secret is this: their power was always an illusion, and your submission was the only thing maintaining that illusion. The moment you stopped playing along, the moment you stopped pretending their opinions mattered, the moment you walked away without looking back, their entire empire of influence crumbled into dust. They were never actually powerful. They were just surrounded by people who believed they were. And you were the biggest believer of all. You gave them weight they didn't earn. You gave them authority they didn't deserve. You gave them a throne built from your own diminishment, and the day you stopped building it, the day you stopped holding them up, they fell so hard the impact is still reverberating through their hollow lives. Think about how absolutely poetic this is, how perfectly the universe has orchestrated this reversal. They threw you out to protect their comfort, to maintain their control, to preserve their fragile sense of superiority. They needed you gone because your presence was starting to reveal cracks in their facade. You were asking questions they couldn't answer. You were seeing through masks they thought were permanent. You were growing in ways that made them look stagnant. And stagnant things hate movement, they hate change, they hate evolution because it reminds them that they're dying while still breathing. So they made the choice, the irreversible, eternally regrettable choice to remove you from their presence. And in doing so, they gave you the greatest gift anyone has ever given you: freedom. Freedom from their limitations. Freedom from their smallness, freedom from their desperate need to keep everyone around them just as broken and scared as they are. But here's where it gets truly beautiful, truly catastrophic for them and transformative for you. You didn't just leave, you ascended. You didn't just walk away, you levitated beyond their comprehension. You took that rejection, that abandonment, that betrayal, and you alchemized it into fuel. Every moment they made you feel small became a reminder to grow larger. Every time they dismissed you became proof that you needed to become undeniable. Every instance of their cruelty became a brick in the fortress you've now built around your peace, your power, your presence. They thought they were destroying you, but they were actually destroying the only version of you that could ever be controlled. They murdered the you that cared about their approval. And what rose from that grave is something they have no power over, no influence on, no access to. You're operating on a frequency they can't even detect anymore. Let's talk about what you've become in their absence, because this is where the transformation gets visceral, where the shift becomes undeniable even to the most skeptical observer. You're not softer now, you're sharper. You're not kinder in the way they wanted you to be. You're kind in a way that protects your energy. You're not quieter. You're selective about when to use your voice. Every single survival mechanism they criticized you for, every defense mechanism they called toxic, every boundary they called selfish, all of it is crystallized into a form of power they can't comprehend. You're not playing nice anymore because nice was always code for controllable. You're not seeking peace anymore because peace was always code for submission. You're not trying to fit in anymore because fitting in was always about making yourself smaller so their egos could breathe easier. Now you take up space unapologetically, you exist loudly even in silence, you command attention without asking for it. Here's something they'll never admit, something that would shatter what's left of their fragile self-image if they ever voiced it out loud. They miss you. Not the you they pretended to know, not the you they tried to control, but the real you. The you that existed before they started trying to shape you into something manageable. They miss your energy, that indefinable thing that made rooms feel alive when you entered. They miss your laugh, the real one, the one that came before they taught you to perform happiness for their comfort. They miss your intensity, even though they spent years telling you it was too much, because now they're surrounded by lukewarm people with lukewarm dreams and lukewarm passion, and they're drowning in the mediocrity they created. They threw out the fire because it was burning too bright, and now they're freezing in the darkness they chose, wondering why everything feels so cold, so empty, so profoundly meaningless without you there to give it weight, to give it purpose, to give it life. And do you know what's eating them alive more than anything else? More than the regret, more than the loss, more than the realization of what they discarded? It's the fact that you're thriving without them. You're not just surviving, you're not just getting by, you're actively flourishing in ways they never imagined possible. Every time they check on you, every time they peek through the digital curtains they think hide their surveillance, they see evidence of your evolution. They see you smiling in ways you never smiled around them. They see you accomplishing things they said you'd never achieve. They see you surrounded by people who actually value you, who actually see you, who actually treat you like the rare and powerful being you've always been. And it destroys them because their entire narrative depended on you failing without them, on you crumbling in their absence, on you coming back begging for a second chance that would allow them to feel powerful again. Now we arrive at the nuclear core of this transformation, the part that fundamentally rewrites the story they tried to tell about you. They called you difficult, but what they meant was you had standards. They called you sensitive, but what they meant was you felt things deeply and refused to numb yourself for their comfort. They called you dramatic, but what they meant was you refused to minimize your pain to protect their guilt. They called you too much, but what they meant was you were more than they could handle, more than they could control. Every label they stuck on you, every diagnosis they assigned you, every character flaw they invented to explain why you didn't fit their mold. All of it was projection. All of it was deflection. All of it was their desperate attempt to avoid looking at the real problem, which was never you, it was always them. Their smallness, their insecurity, their terror of anything they couldn't dominate. Let me tell you what's really happening in the architecture of their minds right now, because this is where the psychological warfare reaches its peak, where the consequences of their actions become inescapable. They're experiencing something psychologists might call cognitive dissonance. But what it really is, what it feels like in the raw mess of human consciousness, is hell. They have to hold two contradictory truths simultaneously. The lie they told themselves about you being the problem, and the reality they're now witnessing of you being the solution, the catalyst, the force that makes everything better by simply existing in your authentic power. They have to reconcile the story they sold to everyone about why you had to go, with the evidence mounting daily that removing you was the single worst decision they've ever made. And that reconciliation never comes. It can't come, because to admit they were wrong about you would require them to admit they're fundamentally wrong about themselves. Here's where your power becomes almost supernatural, almost mythological in its scope and impact. You're not trying to prove anything to them anymore, and that indifference, that complete lack of need for their validation, is the most devastating weapon you could ever wield against them. They're waiting for you to come back, to fight back, to argue, to defend yourself, to give them any indication that they still matter to you, that they still occupy any real estate in your consciousness. But you've given them nothing. You've offered them silence so profound it feels like erasure. You've shown them absence so complete it feels like death. And in that void and that vacuum of attention they once received from you, they're forced to confront the terrifying truth that they no longer exist in your world. Not as friends, not as enemies, not even as memories worth revisiting. They've been categorized, filed away, and forgotten, and there is no torture more exquisite for an ego than irrelevance. But let's go even deeper, past the surface satisfaction of their regret, into the existential shift that's occurred in your reality. You're not the same person who walked into their lives hoping to be accepted. You're not even the same person who walked away wounded and confused. You've died and been reborn so many times since then that the you they remember doesn't even exist anymore except as a ghost, a previous version, a prototype of what you've become. Every cell in your body has been replaced. Every thought pattern has been rewired. Every belief system has been interrogated and reconstructed. You've become something they have no reference point for, no category for, no ability to comprehend. You're speaking a language they never learned. You're operating from a paradigm they can't access. You're living in a dimension they don't have coordinates for, and that's why your shadow is so much bigger than their existence. Because shadows are cast by solid things, by substantial things, by real things. And you've become more real than anything they've ever encountered. Let's talk about what it means to be nuclear, because that's what you've become. That's the energy you now emit. Nuclear doesn't mean explosive in the way they expect, doesn't mean loud or aggressive or violent. Nuclear means containing so much compressed power that your mere presence alters reality. Nuclear means that getting too close to you now comes with consequences they're not equipped to handle. Nuclear means that you've transformed your pain into energy, your betrayal into fuel, your isolation into strength, so concentrated that it could power cities. They wanted you small, contained, manageable, like a candle they could blow out when your light became inconvenient. But you're not a candle anymore, you're a reactor. And reactors don't dim, they don't flicker, they burn at temperatures that would incinerate anyone foolish enough to treat them casually. You're not warm and inviting anymore to those who don't deserve access. You're dangerous and magnificent, and they can feel that shift even from a distance. Here's something that will bring you deep cellular satisfaction. Every person who witnessed them throw you out, every person who watched that betrayal unfold and said nothing, every person who chose their side because it was easier or more convenient, all of them are watching you now with different eyes. They're seeing what they missed. They're understanding what they lost access to. They're realizing that they backed the wrong side of history. And slowly, quietly, in conversations they think you'll never hear about, they're rewriting the narrative. They're admitting they didn't understand the full story. They're confessing they might have been wrong about you. They're wondering out loud if maybe, just maybe, you were the only real one in that entire situation. And your name that they tried to drag through mud, is being whispered now with something that sounds a lot like respect, a lot like awe, a lot like fear. Because everyone loves a resurrection story. Everyone respects a phoenix, and everyone fears what rises from ashes stronger than it was before the burning. Being that you're the only real one, is it better? Being that you are the first, stronger than it was before the burning. Now let's address the elephant in the room. The question that might be flickering in the back of your mind, even as you feel the power of these words resonating in your bones. Do you forgive them? Do you let them back in if they came crawling? Do you offer them the grace they never offered you? And here's the answer that will set you free from even having to make that decision. It doesn't matter. Their repentance, their apology, their sudden realization of your value, none of it matters. Because you're not building your new life around their redemption arc. You're not waiting for closure from people who never gave you honesty. You're not seeking validation from sources that treated you like garbage. You've moved beyond the need for them to get it. Because your peace, your power, your purpose, none of it requires their understanding. They could spend the rest of their lives apologizing, and it wouldn't change the fact that you've already moved on to a reality they're not invited to, a frequency they can't reach, a dimension of existence where their opinions weigh nothing. Let me tell you what they see when they look at you now, those rare moments when they catch a glimpse of what you've become. They see someone who survived what was designed to destroy them. They see someone who took every weapon they used against you and turned it into armor.